Welcome to episode 6 of the 99 Forever podcast. I'm Eric Friesen, and joining me today on the show is my colleague at the Hockey Writers and WHL scout for future considerations, Larry Fisher. Larry, thanks for doing this tonight.
Thanks for having me on, Eric. Looking forward to talking some hockey.
Yeah, I know it's a busy time of year with the Christmas season and everything, so I appreciate you finding some time to talk some Oilers and everything else that we'll get to today.
Yeah, for sure. It's I can always make time to talk hockey, and as much as it's Christmas, it's coming up on the World Juniors and everything else. So I always look forward to this time of year.
For sure, and we'll definitely touch on the Oilers, World Juniors, and everything else surrounding the team. But I think where I just want to start is finding out a little bit about your background. When did you first become a hockey fan or start playing the game?
I started a little late. I think I was 8 years old when I first joined a team. So I would have been probably like second year novice, and I got sent back to initiation and had to work my way up that way. So I actually played 1 year of every level until Pee Wee, when I got caught up to most of my friends in grade 7. And then I played rep in Pee Wee, Bantam, Midget. And then I played a little bit of Junior B and quite a bit of senior hockey throughout the prairies. Senior men's hockey, and then I transitioned into wanting to make a career of it and took a journalism program in Lethbridge and turned it into sports journalism. And yeah, I've been chasing the hockey dream ever since. I always kind of said I wasn't good enough to make the NHL as a player, so I wanted to find a way to hopefully get paid to watch hockey. And 15 years later, I've managed to carve out a decent career doing that.
Yeah, we have a little bit of a similar path there. I mean, I didn't play at a high as high of a level as you did, but I always had that dream too that if I wasn't gonna play in the NHL, it'd be great to be able to talk about hockey for a living and try and make a career in sports journalism. So it's always kind of cool to meet someone who has sort of similar passions or goals that have come through the same way that I have. So that's really interesting. I know you're originally from Saskatchewan too. I'm obviously from Saskatoon, but you're out living in Kelowna now. Can you kind of tell me about how your path sort of led you out to BC?
I guess it was strictly career related. I was again chasing the NHL dream, and obviously I went to school in Lethbridge, from small town Saskatchewan. Went to school in Lethbridge, moved on to a short stint in Pinoca, Alberta, which is just outside Red Deer, and then I ended up in Lloydminster, the border city, for 3.5 years. I was covering junior A, junior B, and senior AAA hockey there, and obviously it wasn't a WHL market, so I was trying to work my way into a WHL market. Obviously, the Saskatoon Star Phoenix, Corey Wolf was there at the time. Daniel Nugent Bowman, who covers the Oilers for the Athletic, actually took over from Corey Wolf. And right around that time, I'd been in the running for a job at the Lethbridge Herald and Kelowna Daily Courier, and it just worked out that Kelowna offered me a job first back in 2008. So I came out here knowing it was not only a WHL community, but one of the premier franchises in the WHL and one of the nicest places in Canada to live. I didn't know anybody here. I didn't know a single soul. I played Junior B with a kid from the area, so he hooked me up with kind of his local friend group, a fellow follower of the Oilers. And so, yeah, it worked out great. I lived with the guy that I played hockey with when I first got here. And now 11 years later, I've obviously made a life for myself in Kelowna. I have a mortgage here, a fiance here, Two little fur babies, two little Yorkie dogs. And yeah, so we have a nice life here. But again, I still would love to chase the NHL dream to that next step and work my way up one more level, be it whether it's Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary. I'd go pretty much anywhere. Vegas, any of the California teams. I'm hoping to take that step still, but obviously at the same time happy with where the career has taken me so far to be calling Kelowna home.
Well, you couldn't ask for a much better place to, work in the NHL than in California. I mean, I think a lot of people would love to be there, but probably in terms of Canadian perspective, you're the closest to it living out in Kelowna. And it's great to hear you talk about Lloydminster too, because I had such a great experience there myself when I was interning at Newcap TV. And I don't know were the Bobcats already there by the time you took over, or was it the previous Junior A team?
I was there for the transition from the
Okay.
Lloydminster Blazers to the Lloydminster Bobcats, and actually, small world. I did some work with New Cap TV as well, and the sports anchor at the time was Reed Wilkins, who
Oh
obviously
yeah.
hosts for Oilers now, and the Edmonton Oilers radio broadcast with 6:30 Ched. So I did color commentary for Reed at the Allen Cup in Stony Plain in 2008, I want to say, just before I moved out.
Oh, that's
To Kelowna.
awesome.
So yeah, kind of a small world how a lot of people that are tied into the Oilers have come through the Lloydminster channel.
Yeah, when I was there 2 winters ago, I kind of found that there were so many ties to Edmonton through there. I mean, most of the interns all come from the University of Alberta, or not the university, pardon me, NAIT. So for me, being someone who actually went through the university system in Calgary at Mount Royal University and took sports journalism in Toronto at Centennial College, I was maybe one of the only ones that they've ever had that didn't come through NAIT for interns there. But just to finish up on my thought on the Bobcats, I'm sure you experienced this too. Even though it isn't WHL, AJHL hockey is still very good, and the passion that community has for it. I mean, there were 65-year-old retired guys who would come out and watch them practice every morning, just, while they got their Tim Hortons coffee. I mean, it really is like a community team, I felt.
Yeah, it's too bad they haven't enjoyed more on ice success. When I was there, I really enjoyed the people that I was working with as far as covering the team as a beat reporter. Jim Crossan was the general manager, who's now an amateur scout for the Edmonton Oilers and has been essentially since I moved to Kelowna in 2008. He got the Oilers job, I believe, that same upcoming hockey season, and he's been going strong for a decade in a scouting role with the Edmonton Oilers, watching the WHL guys. But he was the general manager in Lloydminster when I was there, and Tom Keka was the head coach, who's now up in Fort McMurray and has developed a real good reputation as one of the stronger coaches in the Alberta Junior Hockey League, as well as I know he works with Keano College now, I believe, in Fort McMurray, but another real good guy. And between the two of them, for whatever reason, the on-ice success just didn't come, and here we are a decade later. I know they hosted the RBC Cup, which was big for Lloyd, but they haven't consistently been a strong team in that league, and I know they're kind of at the bottom of the standings again this season, which is difficult to watch because it is a real strong hockey community, and they've produced, that Lloydminster area since I left has produced a ton of kids for the Western Hockey League through the Bantam draft, and you can look at most of the WHL rosters have somebody from that Lloydminster, Marwayne area. So it's been a hockey hotbed for talent since when I was there. Braden Holtby was coming up, the Draisaitl brothers, David and Darian were there, and there were some other guys that went on to play pro and stuff from Lloydminster, but it wasn't what it is now, where they're producing a large number of their Bantam and midget kids are going on to play in the Western League, if not to play for the hometown Bobcats. So it would be nice to see them have some more consistent success with the on-ice product, but it is a real strong, passionate fan base there, and I've kept in touch with a lot of people from Lloydminster, even guys like Kent Staniforth and Shane Tomeyer, the play-by-play voice, and a lot of those guys, even 11 years later, I keep it in touch to some degree anyway.
Yeah, I think I'm just trying to think off the top of my head who their most recent high pick would be. Would it be Ty Smith, the Devils?
Yeah,
prospect?
he came through Lloydminster, but he didn't play a lot of his minor hockey there. He went the academy route, but he's a Lloydminster kid, and I talked to them last year when I was covering the World Juniors in Vancouver and tried to sort of spin the Lloydminster angle on the story. And he sort of said, I'm from there, but I didn't do a ton of my development there. I don't really necessarily go back there in the off season and train. But he would be, obviously, he was the first overall pick in the WHL Bantam draft, so he's one of their premier prospects. There's guys like Zane Franklin and Oren Santazo and Bryce Kindop, and I'm just trying to think some of the other guys, the Hilsendagger brothers. There's a large number of guys that are kind of scattered all through the WHL over the last 5 to 7 years, and there's probably 10 guys currently playing in the WHL between 16 and 20 years old that have come through the Lloydminster minor hockey system. So it is become a lot stronger, that hockey system, since I left Lloydminster, and that part of it's good to see the development.
For sure. And aren't there a lot of those hockey academies out in BC? Because I remember when I covered the Max Midget tournament in Calgary in 2014, that's when my eyes were first really open to all these different hockey academies that kids were going to. I wasn't perhaps aware that it was becoming as common as it is now, just because you assume that everyone goes through the minor hockey system, plays junior, A, go up to the WHL. But do you have a pretty good grasp on those hockey academies and why they've been so prevalent?
Yeah, it's huge out here, and being from Saskatchewan, we all know about Notre Dame, kind of the original academy, and we know a little bit about Shattuck St. Mary's because Sidney Crosby went through there, and a lot of the big name NHL players, or some of them, have went through those two programs, Notre Dame and Shattuck St. Mary's. But here in Kelowna, or I guess it's technically based out of Lake Country, Winfield, but Pursuit of Excellence is the big one. And then you go down to Penticton, and there's the Okanagan Hockey Academy, which has since expanded to Edmonton. They have a European school. They've really been expanding. But those two programs, you look at the WHL Bantam Draft. It used to be you'd see a kid from Looseland, my hometown, or you'd see, these kids from across the prairies that played minor hockey. But now it's almost strictly, they're still from those areas, but they're being drafted almost strictly out of the Canadian School Sport Hockey League, which is the academies, and largely Pursuit of Excellence and Okanagan Hockey Academy. They dominate the Bantam Draft almost every year. At least half the first round, if not more, are coming out of those two academies alone and through that league. So it costs a lot of money to go there, but you're on the ice every day. You're getting a lot of its former NHL players that are coaching there and high-level coaching. And most of those kids are becoming, again, you look at the WHL rosters, your high-end guys, the vast majority of them played academy. They didn't play minor hockey. Maybe not so much, again, you look at Saskatoon, still the Blazers and the Contacts are still real big there, and they don't necessarily have that same level of academy in Alberta even, and certainly in Saskatchewan. But out here in BC, the academies rule the day as far as producing talent for the Western League and the WHL Bantam Draft.
Well, that's awesome, and I appreciate the insight on that too. Just going back into your own history a little bit, one thing I like to do with all my guests is kind of find out a little about their history of cheering for the Oilers. Now, because you work in media, I don't know if you consider yourself an Oilers fan anymore or just an Oilers observer, but maybe can you just take me back to some of your earliest memories of the Oilers, watching them, and maybe one or two of your favorite players growing up?
And I'm glad you prefaced it that way because Sean, when I was on with the Oil Night, referenced a couple times, we're all Oiler fans. And you're right. My goal is to potentially cover the Oilers, and you want to be an unbiased media member. So absolutely. I no longer watch the games from a fan perspective. I can't remember the last time I've attended a live Oilers game or watched a game on TV, including playoffs a couple of years ago, and I'm being honest, where I celebrated a goal or, my fan attachment, my emotional attachment to the Oilers is next to none. Of course, I followed them. I grew up in a family of Oilers fans, and I followed that team closer. I know more about the Oilers than any other NHL team. And, if two games are on TV on the same night, I'm going to watch the Oiler game. And I still have that attachment and that interest level. But I'm no longer, I've been able to remove the fan, and I'm able to cover the team and objectively and watch the team objectively. And again, mentoring under guys like Mark Spector and Jim Matheson, guys that I've got to know quite well over the last decade. There is no room for the fan. You have to be able to, take off those glasses and really just focus on watching the game. So I've grown a lot that way from, say, when I was in Pinoca. And actually that was the year I was in Pinoca is when Rafi Torres and Jarrett Stoll, and they had the Edmonton Roadrunners, the lone season of the AHL. And, back then, and even the Oiler games prior to that, and growing up as a teenager. And when I was in Lloydminster, I think I only missed 2 playoff games in the 2006 run to the Stanley Cup Finals. I spent at least 1 or 2 years of college tuition money that I could have put a kid through.
Wow.
I was... I did have media credentials for some of those games as well during that run, but I spent a lot of fan money to go watch those games and cheer. And those are obviously 2006 playoff run, some hugely memorable moments. Some of those were nosebleed seats, and some of them were center ice, 20 rows up in right at the top of the bottom deck, prime seats. I took my dad to, I think, game 4 or game 6 of the Stanley Cup final. That's a big memory for me and for him. And obviously, when I was growing up, we lived about 4 hours from Edmonton, but a lot of the times for working on the farm, that was sort of the Christmas bonus. Was Dad would take us and the hired men to an Oilers game, and a lot of times our team trips, right, playing Pee Wee Bantam stuff, team wind up trips, we would load the entire minor hockey team on the bus and we'd go to an Oiler game. So lots of memories that way. Was there for some of the big overtime goals over the years, and lots of good memories at the old barn, Northlands or Rexall, whatever you want to call it, Skyreach. And I have taken in probably about 10 games so far at Rogers. My fiance did her nursing through Edmonton and had to do a 3-month internship there. So I was able to go visit her and watch some games. I haven't been back in a couple of years, but yeah, lots of exciting times in Edmonton watching the Oilers. And like I said, try to remove the fan angle. But favorite players, probably because I was a goaltender growing up and still kind of a beer league goalie from time to time. Curtis Joseph, Bill Ranford. Bill Ranford probably, again, was right when I was getting into hockey. He was the Oilers goaltender. And then Curtis Joseph was huge for me in my, Pee Wee Bantam midget years. He was the guy and really enjoyed him. And then even Tommy Sallow. And then after that, I kind of drifted into more of the media mindset and not so much a favorite player, but definitely enjoy watching Connor McDavid. You get your money's worth every night when you're in the building and he's playing.
Absolutely. And, it's great to, just kind of reminisce about some of those 90s teams and hear those names like you mentioned, because I think that a lot of Oiler fans from our generation, or maybe even a little before, still can remember those 90s teams so well. I was, still just a kid then, but that still rings true. And as for the 06 Cup run, just hearing you talk about how many games you went to, I'm pretty jealous that you got to attend all those. But just watching on TV, you could really see that the building was just electric every night. And man, I wish I could have been there. But as a 17-year-old making like $7.50 at Safeway, it would have been pretty tough to scrounge together enough cash to go to one of those playoff games.
Yeah, there were a few nights, I think it was bordering on $1,000 a ticket, $900 a ticket, something like that. But like I said, we wasted, and then, at that time we were enjoying ourselves. So the drinks weren't much cheaper than they are now. So it was a good $1,000 night with gas money from Lloydminster, and if we were staying overnight in the city or whatever. But I think me and my good buddy Sean Bell, who's a realtor for Century 21 in Kelowna, we went to most of those games together. And looking back, maybe besides his wedding day and his birth of his sons, I think those are some of his best memories still too. And we reminisce often about the good times before, during, and after those games in Edmonton and the Blue Mile, or whatever you want to call it back then.
Absolutely. And I think that I don't want to get too far off the current team, but I think that's a good way to transition into that now. We've talked a little bit about your background in becoming a fan and moving into media, but looking at the current state of the team, they got off to a great start, 5-0, 7-1, whichever you like to say. And then after being in first place for 58 days, they've had a recent rough patch now over the month of December where they've started to slide a little bit down to third in the Pacific. Just can I get some general thoughts on what you think has gone wrong this month and how they pull their way out of it?
Maybe it's the team we're seeing now is maybe more so the team we thought we were going to see from the outset. Not too many people had the Oilers predicted to be leading the Pacific Division and leading the Western Conference through the first 2 months of the season and at American Thanksgiving. So I think some of the things that were somewhat red flags coming out of training camp, obviously not enough scoring depth. The goaltending had overachieved through the first 2 months. It was so consistent and so strong. And prior to the season, there was a poll, I believe it was on The Athletic, that ranked Mikko Koskinen as the league's worst starting goalie. And
yeah, I remember that.
Mike Smith would have been right there with him in the bottom end of the league. And for them to come out and provide such quality, consistent goaltending, I wouldn't say they were stealing games, because I think the system, the 5 up, 5 back, the group defense that Dave Tippett and Jim Playfair have installed in the group, I think that's been very effective. Obviously, the special teams they're still right at the top of the league. So are they overachieving, or are they for real now that you're this far into the season? That power play is much improved and the penalty kill is much improved from previous seasons. So, but at the same time, again, the goaltending has Mikko Koskinen has provided some good starts recently. Again, he's been solid and he's kind of established himself as the number one guy, at least in the present. They're still getting quality goaltending from him, but there was a stretch there where the goaltending definitely sagged and they weren't getting the same level of goaltending. And obviously the scoring depth, if whether they're splitting McDavid and Draisaitl and NugentHopkins on three different lines, the quality of wingers just aren't there. And it's hard for those guys to carry a line individually. And I think a lot of the scoring is still coming from the power play. You'd like to get that 5-on-5 scoring and again, the depth scoring going. And I think that was a big criticism of Edmonton going into the season. Who's going to score if McDavid and Draisaitl don't? Well, they rode those guys. They gave them tons of minutes, and maybe they're tiring out a bit now too. A bit of fatigue factor for the top guys, but they're right there, on pace for 140, 130, leading the league in scoring and potentially topping their own career highs that we didn't think they could exceed from last season. So the best players have been their best players, and obviously the goaltending perhaps overachieved out of the gate, and the new system really took hold. The new coaching strategies paid early dividends, and they got off to such a good start. But again, other teams are adjusting to the new systems that Edmonton's playing. Teams are making adjustments now that they've seen the Oilers once or twice going into these return matchups, and I think that can impact results as the season goes along too. Anytime you get a new coach, they don't know what to expect, the opposition, and once they do, they get to kind of move their chess piece, and you see a little different outcome, and as you've seen the same team over and over. And I think that's maybe has something to do with the results leveling off a bit. But all in all, I mean, I think if you told Ken Holland prior to the season this is where he'd be on December 20th, I think he would gladly take their current place in the standings. But now it's like you said, how do they kind of work past some of this and get back to as opposed to just a 500 team, win one, lose one, win two, lose two? How do you kind of get on a roll and be an upper echelon team? And are they capable of that? In which case, that's where it becomes, does Ken Holland turn into a buyer towards the trade deadline, or is this team not ready to take that next step? So it'll be interesting to see the next 2 months leading up to the trade deadline.
Absolutely. And, you kind of just touched on several things I wanted to talk about there. And one of them was, are the Oilers playing Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid too much? Because like you said, the point totals have been incredible. There was a time when they were averaging 2 points per game, and it's dipped slightly to the point where they're now on pace for roughly 134 or 132 points this season, which would still be the most that anyone scored since 1995-96 when Yager and Lemieux each reached that total. But can the Oilers continue to ride these guys every night? Because it almost seems like if they have an off night, the Oilers aren't winning. They need to produce 3 points between them at least to get this team over the hump. And you have to hope that Mikko Koskinen is going to hold the fort down, because the way I look at it, and you tell me if you agree or not, it seems like the coaching mentality from Dave Tippett is, when Connor and Leon are on the ice, you let them do their thing, and then for the other 25 or 35 minutes, however long that they're not on the ice, you just have to coach real stingy defensive hockey and just hope to shut down the other team, and then just hope that Draisaitl and McDavid are going to do their thing and get you the win.
I think that's accurate. I think that's fair that they attack when those guys are on the ice, and they play more conservative anyway when the other three lines or two lines or however they have them split up. But yeah, they definitely play a more structured game throughout the rest of the lineup, and they don't take the chances that obviously Connor and Leon are able to take and encouraged to take, because they know that they're responsible essentially, like you said, for a few points a game. And if they're going to get more than 3 goals, chances are Connor and Leon are in on at least 2 of the 3. And that's a concern in the big picture, but right now that's the way they need to play to win. They do need to lean on those 2 guys. And are they leaning on them too much? I think they're both young guys. They're not, Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin are further along in their career. They've got more miles. I think these are young thoroughbreds. You can ride them. I also think the minutes look higher, inflated, because they are playing the full 2 minutes on the power play.
Exactly. That's another big thing.
And on the power play, there's a lot of standing around. Once you get in the zone and set up, or you win the draw, there's a lot of mental reps. You gotta think the game for the full 2 minutes at a high level, but you don't necessarily have to move as much as far as physically fatiguing yourself. Obviously, they use the if the zone is cleared and they got to do a re-entry, they're using Connor as the puck carrier on the entries, and he's got to wind it up all the way from his own zone and gain the offensive zone, and that is taxing a little bit, especially when you watch the Blues game and how the Blues really keyed on him. Almost 4 guys cornered him at the blue line every time on the entries, be it even strength or on the power play. It's hard for him to play through that tight checking, and some teams have tried shadowing him. So he is tiring at times, but again, I think he's a young guy, very well conditioned through I know Leon was at the BioSteel camp with Gary Roberts as well, and those guys came into the season in elite shape, and obviously Connor had to overcome his knee injury, which was a big question mark, and not only did he overcome it, but again, he's almost gained a gear, which is something not a lot of people were expecting. But I think, have they slowed down a little bit? I would almost say the other teams have, made the adjustments to really focus on which areas they're attacking, which lanes they're attacking, and it's a lot of smart people working the NHL on the coaching side of it, and the analytics and the video side of it, and they've found ways to neutralize those two more so as the season goes on. I don't think it's so much a fatigue thing, but again, if you want them to be in peak shape come a 7-game playoff series, you don't want to completely drive them into the ground prior to the calendar flipping to 2020 either.
I agree exactly, but the one thing I will say on that is that if the Oilers are completely burnt out when they get to the playoffs and get swept in the first round, as disappointing as that would be, I think that most Oilers fans would still take that deal today if they could, because getting swept in the first round is better than being done on April 4th. But you know what I'm saying? Like
it's huge.
It's tough. It's tough because you don't want to burn the guys out, right?
The playoffs, it is, and Daryl Cates wants that. Bob Nicholson wants that. The people who are in charge of the revenue, the season tickets, they're pushing for that, and that message trickles down to Ken Holland, down to Dave Tippett, and those guys' minutes are that high because they need them to win games, and ultimately the franchise needs to make the playoffs. And like you said, if they're tired and they don't go far in the playoffs, at least they made it, and it's a confidence boost for the fan base, for the season ticket holders, and
it's a building block, right?
It's a building block, and for the players too, to get that confidence that, hey, at least we're back in the playoffs, and it gets Connor and Leon especially focused on that. We're here, we're on a playoff team again, because you don't want to continuously miss the playoffs in their prime years. And again, I think they're in it for the long haul, and they see the Ken Holland 5-year plan, and they see the prospect pools ranked in the top 10 overall in the league, and I mean, they're at training camp with these kids, and they watch. Both of them are students of the game. They're going to watch the World Juniors whenever they can, and they're going to see some of these Oiler prospects that are coming up, and they're excited. But they're in a "what have you done for me lately" league, and they do want to win now. Connor is very passionate about that, and I know Leon from getting to know him quite well when he was here in Kelowna with the Memorial Cup year in 2015. He's a winner, and he was the most valuable player of the Memorial Cup tournament in a losing cause. They lost in overtime in the final, and you couldn't, even to today, you can barely get a comment out of Leon about how well he played in that tournament because the team didn't win. And as much as those two could win battle each other for the Art Ross and be right up there in the points race, all that matters to them is making the playoffs. And I do think they believe if once you're in, you can go on a run. And as long as you have enough gas in the tank and you're not battling injuries and stuff, a lot can happen in the playoffs. But I think they definitely need to get in this year based on their strong start, based on the stats of American Thanksgiving. When you're in that position that they were in, I mean, it's a 75% chance to get into the playoffs if you're in the playoffs, period, even if you're in a wild card spot on American Thanksgiving. But when you're leading the division, you should get into the playoffs. And if not, you had a collapse, you had a failure from that point on in the last 2/3 of the season. And that would almost be more of a step back than missing the playoffs, having been out of the playoff race or not out of the race, but out of a playoff position at American Thanksgiving. Had they been where Calgary was at American Thanksgiving and they didn't make the playoffs, it wouldn't be as big of a letdown as you get the franchise and the fan base's hopes up by being a first place team for the first 2 months. But again, the schedule was quite favorable for Edmonton in October, and it's gradually gotten tougher too, which impacts the results and the standings. But I think playoffs is, from Daryl Cates on down, especially with the strong start, is something that is almost, I don't want to say it's a make or break, and it's certainly Dave Tippett's job probably won't be on the line because they want some consistency in that department as well if they don't make the playoffs. But it would be a huge disappointment, the fact they were leading the Pacific Division at American Thanksgiving, to miss the playoffs, even though the standings now are as tight as they are today.
And you know what? They still have a bit of a cushion over the teams that are just outside of the wild card spot, but they really do need to get back on track. And this team is in desperate need of a 3-game or 4-game winning streak just to kind of cement their spot a little bit again and just give themselves a bit of breathing room. Before I forget, one thing I wanted to touch on the Oilers power play before we move on to a couple other topics. Do you like that they always drop the puck, whether it's Clefbaum or whoever dropping the puck to McDavid, and he, picks it up with a full head of steam and skates it over the blue line? Does that become too predictable and easy to defend, or is it just because he's so talented that 80-90% of the time he's going to get by the defense anyway?
There's 31 teams in the NHL. There's 22 teams in the WHL, and I want to say 95% of them break into the zone that exact same way, where it's painful to watch in the Western League because no team has a guy as fast as McDavid, but to see defensemen skate up to the red line and turn around and look for that back pass, and penalty killers are getting smarter and smarter at breaking that up and game planning against it. And you see it at every level that it's one of those fads that's how power plays break in 2019-20, and almost every team at every level is doing that. So who was the trend center and what are the analytics as to why that's the best way in? Are there alternatives? Absolutely. It's not something we've seen until, the last couple seasons. It started to become a trend and a fad. I'm not a huge fan of it, but obviously people smarter than me on the analytics side are suggesting that is the most effective way to break in. I think they could definitely have a few different looks as opposed to the same repetitive break, not necessarily break out, but the way they break up the ice on the power play. And like I said, though, I watch the Kelowna Rockets do the exact same thing every night. I see most of their opponents do the exact same thing. And I'm watching a game right now where there was just a power play and exactly the same thing. Get to the red line, hit the guy with speed and let him back. Hope everybody backs off as you're coming up to the red line. And then the guy with speed has enough speed and angles to choose an entry into the zone. So a lot of teams do it. Do I love it? Not necessarily. There's a few things like that. I don't necessarily like the shot pass or the high deflection in the high slot where kind of it's a pass and the guy directs it towards the net from the high slot, kind of the bumper position. A lot of teams do that. I watch even, the Kelowna Rockets have practice a lot of times. They will do a drill for an extensive amount of time where the defenseman kind of walks the line and then shoots towards the top's high slot or hash marks and have that guy redirect the puck on net. And it gets robotic and repetitive where that's all they look for in the game because that's how they practice. And much the same with your up ice breakout. It's just, it becomes a pattern and very much so your mind gets trained that that's the only way to do it. And it's so commonplace in hockey right now. It's not just an Oilers thing. It's league wide and at every level. It seems to be a copycat league. And for whatever reason, they believe that's what's working. And I haven't asked a lot of people about that as to why it works, but that's definitely the trend.
Sounds like your dogs agree with you.
Yeah, there's a dog outside, so he's getting fired up.
Okay. He's one of those ones who always likes to bark at the other one, right?
Yeah,
that's probably most dogs, actually, but it's funny. So just one last thought on the playoffs. Going into this spring, like you said, we're just about at the halfway point of the season. They've played 36 games. What is your prediction? And I hate to put people on the spot for predictions, but I think it makes for good podcasts. What do you think they're going to do this year? Will they make the playoffs, and where do you see them finishing, whether it be in the top 3 or one of the wild card spots?
I think they need some reinforcements to make the playoffs. I think definitely doable, but I think there is some trades that need to happen to bolster the wing positions, especially. And I think if Ken Holland can bring in a couple extra bodies, because I don't think the current guys are necessarily getting the job done on that front. But I think if he can bolster the wing positions and get one or two wingers, I know he didn't like the price on Taylor Hall, but I think if they can get an impact winger or two, I think the playoffs become a lot more realistic. Right now, I think with the current roster, the status quo, I mean, I think a team like San Jose is going to gain some ground. I really do think that Bob Bugner is going to get that team trending up. I think Calgary is obviously much improved from where they started the season under Jeff Ward. He's got them trending in the right direction. I think Vancouver's falling back to the pack, but I think the big thing is win those division games. They got games against Calgary and Vancouver coming up on either side of
games,
Christmas.
yeah.
Those are, like I said, we're halfway through the season, but those are absolutely 4-point games. And right from Vegas through Arizona, it's a tight division. It's almost impossible to say. And even on the after hours program, they put Ken Holland on the spot. He was kind of the guy who came up with the American Thanksgiving thing, and Scott Oak and the guys, they sort of, and Louis DeBrusk kind of asked him about that. Are you confident at American Thanksgiving as a first place team? Are you going to make the playoffs? And much like I'm doing with you, he kind of danced around the question, and he didn't want to say that, we need, or he didn't even want to say we're in a good spot. I like our chances. He basically just said, it's one of those years where, again, they had a favorable schedule at the start. They made the most of it. Good for them. The new systems worked well. But now you're at that point in the season where every 10 games, the level of play ramps up. Things get tougher. Teams make more adjustments. And I really do feel that they need some sort of reinforcements up front, some boost of depth scoring. I don't think it's coming from the farm. I really don't think Kaylor Yamamoto and Tyler Benson and guys like that are necessarily ready to make an impact. I think Ken Holland's committed to keeping them in Bakersfield, and that's the right play. But whether it's a Chris Kreider or Tyler Toffoli or somebody like that, I think they still need a good boost, and sooner rather than later. I mean, I like that Arizona moved on Taylor Hall when they did, because they get a good chunk with him. And put it this way, if Taylor Hall doesn't fit in Arizona, they could potentially move him again before the NHL trade deadline. They got 2 months of evaluation there. There's no clauses or anything that say they can't flip him if he's not the right fit. So I like that they moved sooner than later, and I think he will help that team. And obviously, because of that trade, you have to almost envision Arizona ahead of Edmonton just because they made that move. Vegas, I think most people liked as the division winner prior to the season, and I think they still will end up on top. So, I mean, you got Calgary coming up hard on Edmonton. You got, I still think San Jose, they need better goaltending there, and they need their veteran guys the Brent Burnses and Erik Karlssons and stuff to kind of hit their playoff button or get into playoff mode, because they really need to string together the 3 and 4 and 7 game winning streaks. But again, if Edmonton's going to play 500 hockey for the foreseeable future, you're going to see them trend down the standings quite quickly. And I mean, we could be talking less than a month from now. They could be a couple weeks from now. They could be on the outside looking into that wild card picture. So my prediction is if they get a reinforcement, somebody who can help score on the wing and allow them to get 2 lines going, because I like James Neal, but I don't think him and Nugent-Hopkins at 5-on-5 are a huge threat. And I know they would like to keep Leon and Connor together at 5-on-5, because that's the only time they really truly have a dominant line. So if they can get somebody, again, we've been saying get a winger for Nuge for a long time. Yeah. And James Neal has 16 goals, but lots on the power play. And he's just not a guy that really moves the needle a whole lot 5-on-5.
No. And he's got a bad plus minus and everything, but it's the goals are still goals, right? I mean, those power play goals are big. It's just, can he clean up his 5-on-5 game? I know what you're saying.
Yeah, or be a catalyst, right? When that
Yeah.
line goes out, you don't ever really get the feeling that, even Nuge, I mean, he's a really reliable two-way guy, and he's got positive metrics and stuff, but he doesn't, when he gets the puck, the other team isn't worried necessarily about, he's going to do what Connor and Leon do, right? So it'd be nice to get somebody that him and Neil can play together, and then bring in another guy that can really push that line forward and give them two good scoring lines, and then maybe clean up something in the bottom six where you get a little more offensive capabilities down there as well. Because again, as the season goes, other teams are going to key in more and more on McDavid and Draisaitl, and through video and stuff, they're going to catch on to things that they can shut down, and you're going to need that second wave of offense, which we knew right out of training camp that was a big question mark and a big concern, the depth scoring, and it hasn't been there, but the top end's been so good that they've been able to carry the team. And as other teams adjust, they do need the second wave, and I think Ken Holland is going to have to find a way to provide that second wave, because I don't think it's currently there. I don't think they have the internal options. I don't think Jujhar Khaira is going to suddenly, go on a tear. I don't think, Joachim Nygard, I like little bits of his game, but I don't think you notice him because he's fast, but he's not going to score a ton, I don't think. I don't think Gaetan Haas, Marcus Granlund, I mean, you can go down the list. I don't think you have another 20-goal scorer, certainly not 20, maybe not even 15-goal scorer out of that bottom six. And you look at the best teams in the league and the strongest offensive teams, they have third-line guys that are chipping in on a nightly basis. And Edmonton needs a guy like that, and I think Ken Holland has to bring him in from the outside.
Absolutely. And, guys you mentioned like Kreider or Toffoli coming in would help. Even I've been thinking about a guy like Kyle Palmieri, if they were able to bring him in. He always seems to score against the Oilers, and I think that's a guy who could help out. Or, another name that's been mentioned in the Edmonton media a lot is JG Pajot. So,
the third line center role, and we haven't necessarily talked about that, but that's, Ryan Strome would sure look good there still, but JG Pajot would be a great addition. And again, it's going to come down to price and timing, the asking price and the timing of the trade. I know Ken Holland is still sort of in evaluation mode, and he sort of said that on After Hours. He wasn't sure. He didn't say, I don't know if I believe in this team yet, even though they're in first place, but he wasn't adamant that, we are a playoff team and we have the horses that are going to go on a good run here. It was still kind of evaluation mode, and I would like to see him maybe be a bit more proactive, because I do think striking sooner than later will help, get this team. You want to gel as much as you can with these new guys. So if they're available, again, the asking price is going to be higher maybe today than at the trade deadline, because they can ask for more and they can work their way down to what their bottom line, what they're willing to take. But I would try and get somebody sooner than later. I know basically we're at the holiday freeze now, so we can't expect any trades for the next little bit, but I'd like to see a body or two in January as opposed to waiting until the end of February.
Yeah, give yourself as much runway as you can.
For sure. And again, I mean, knock on wood, they've had a decent run with injuries. They've, obviously Adam Larson was a big loss and they survived that, but, and Nuge was out for NugentHopkins for a smaller amount of time. But again, you noticed when NugentHopkins was out, that's where a lot of these struggles really, why are they not where they were in the standings? They missed NugentHopkins big time. So you could imagine how badly they would miss Leon or Connor. So again, if you can get another line going, you never want to lose one of your top guys. But again, you just got to get deeper in general, certainly up front. I mean, I think the defense has held up decently, and I think the goaltending has exceeded expectations. Maybe they regressed a little bit, but again, Koskinen's picked it up. The special teams have been great and fairly consistent throughout the season. So really, it's just that 5-on-5 depth scoring, and it's mainly on the wings. I mean, third line center is a pressing need, but mainly I would get if possible, a fringe middle six winger and maybe another bottom six guy. And those players should be available, and I would like to think they're available now if you're making the right calls and you're willing to include a Jesse Puljujarvi. And again, I don't think a first-round pick would be necessary for a guy like Tyler Toffoli. Maybe he'll get one at the deadline, but again, LA's been winning a little bit too. But I do think they're a seller, and I think he's going to be moved, and he's hot right now. So now would be the perfect time to get him and slot him in there, and hopefully get another line going, get a consistent depth just one more 20-goal guy would be perfect, I think, to increase the 5-on-5 scoring to hopefully be able to hang with a deep team like Vegas.
Absolutely. And it's just going back to a point you mentioned a couple minutes ago. It's so disappointing that Peter Chiarelli just couldn't get out of his own way, because you could make the argument if they still had Ryan Strome, they might have actually won that trade. And
For Eberle,
for Eberle, and I mean, no one would have thought that initially. But the way that he's playing right now, the fact being younger and a center, it's just, and Eberle's
right
struggled. Eberle struggled a little bit this year. I think he only has 3 or 4 goals. It's just frustrating that he only played 100 games in an Oilers sweater, because if Chiarelli would have just been a little more patient with the guy that he was so desperate to bring in for Eberle, they might still have their third line center. So that's frustrating, but so be it. They'll move on, and they got the right guy in charge now, and let's hope that Ken Holland will bring up these prospects and surround Connor with the necessary talent to be very competitive when he's 25. They might not be a cup contender right now, but maybe 3 years from now they will be. And like you said, just try and add some guys through free agency if they can, but not overspend, or perhaps at the trade deadline, just to kind of reinforce that. But yes, there's there's moves that need to be made to get this team really over the hump. I do have them in a playoff spot right now. Going into the season, I didn't, and this is one of the first times that I actually didn't predict the Oilers to make the playoffs in recent years. So if they could get in, that would be huge, and based on their early start, they really should. One last thing I want to talk about regarding the Oilers before we go into some World Junior talk is Darnell Nurse and Zach Kassian. I'd like to just get a thought from you on their play through the first half of the season. And there's been a lot of talk about their upcoming contracts, with Nurse being a restricted free agent and Zach Kassian being an unrestricted free agent. So just, can you give me an idea of what you think of their play so far this year, and what you would be willing to give them on a contract?
Well, we can start with Kassian. I mean, he plays well with McDavid and Draisaitl. He is a good fit on that line. He's not just a placeholder. He's a difference maker. He obviously, his physicality is a big part of it, but he's fast and he thinks the game well, and he knows where to go, and he can time it. And I like him on that line. So if they envision McDavid and Draisaitl together as a unit going forward, I like Zach Kassian there. I know, again, they've kind of juggled the lines a bit lately, but when all systems going, that's the top line, and Zach Kassian is a top line player in Edmonton in that situation. Obviously, the good news for Zach Kassian is his contract is up. He's an unrestricted free agent, and his point totals, goal totals are indicating he should be worth a lot, a good chunk of money. In saying that, I think Ken Holland will do his best to negotiate that number down. I think they like Zach Kassian. He likes the team. He likes the city. He knows how good of an opportunity he has playing with those two. Even if he gets, somewhere between Michael Furland and Tom Wilson money somewhere else, playing in a second, third line role, kind of like a Brett Connolly contract in Florida, he's not going to produce the way he is in Edmonton. And he's a guy who had some off-ice issues, but had some struggles as a hockey player too on the ice earlier in his career, where he wasn't living up to his draft status. And, people in, whether it be Vancouver or Buffalo, there was places where he was thought to be almost a bust. So for him to resurrect his career in Edmonton, I think he should be tempted to do I don't want to say hometown discount, but I think if they're willing to give him the 4th year to go from 3 years to 4 years, I think he could bring the number down from 4.5 to 3.5 kind of thing, and sort of meet in the middle. We'll give you an extra year. You give us some cap savings. Because again, the cap situation, it will get better as other contracts come off the books, but it's a bit precarious right now, and they do need to save money where they can. And Zach Kassian is a guy where Ken Holland can negotiate a bit tougher, but he can give him that little bit extra term to bring down the dollar value. And so for me, I think 4 years at 3.5 to 3.75, I'd like to avoid that 4 million number unless he was willing to take the 3 year at 4 million. I would do 4 million over 3 years, or I would give him the 4th year and try and chisel away on that number down to 3.5 kind of thing. Again, it all depends where his agent sits on that, but that's sort of where I stand on Kassian. On Darnell Nurse, I look at the Josh Morrissey contract of I believe it's $6.25 million over 6 years. I think they can sign that one tomorrow, and both player and team should be happy. I mean, I think he is a good character guy, kind of a core piece. I know he gets along great with the leadership group, and he's become more and more of a leader, and his discipline's under control for the most part this year. He's a guy that I don't think his body's going to wear down, even though he blocks a lot of shots and plays physical. I don't think because he's such a good skater and such a physical specimen, I think he's going to be good for 6 more years. So I wouldn't be scared of term, and money-wise, I wouldn't want that contract to start with a 7, but anywhere between 6 and 6.5, I would be fine with. Again, if you expect the cap to, obviously the cap barely went up this year. If you're expecting bigger increases in the next 6 years, a $6.5 million contract for Darnell Nurse in 3 or 4 years might look like a bargain. So I wouldn't be opposed to 6.5. I like the Josh Morrissey contract. I'd try to bring him in as close to 6 as possible, and I would go 6 years likely. And I think Darnell would be happy. I think that should be a pretty easy negotiation. My opinion, even though Darnell's had some tougher negotiations in the past with his bridge deal and almost sitting out and stuff. I know he's driven a hard bargain, but I think that should be an easy negotiation. And it just depends with Kassian, is he going to chase the dollar and squeeze every penny out of some other team, or is he going to be happy with the situation in Edmonton and maybe take a slight hometown discount to really keep a good thing going?
And, for a guy like Kassian, maybe the term is even more important than the dollar figure, because just to have that reassurance that you are going to be with a team for 3 or 4 years, plus he knows that he's not going to get this opportunity. If he goes and signs with another team in the States, there's a good chance he's going to be on their 3rd or 4th line, just because those teams might have a pretty solid top 6 as it is and not have room to fit him in, even though he has shown he can play with elite players. He had that brief stint with the Sedins, and he now has played with McDavid and Draisaitl, so he can do it. But the thing is, are other teams going to see him in that role? And as for Nurse, like you said, I think that I would do that deal today that you mentioned for just a hair over $6 million. And with Brandon Manning coming off the books next summer, that money just goes right to Nurse. So it's not like you're increasing your salary at all there. Plus, who knows, maybe we get a $2 million bump this year. I think we are going to see a bigger bump in a couple of years with the US TV deal coming up. I believe that needs to be negotiated in 2021 or 2022. So we could see the salary cap really rise. And with Seattle coming into the league, I wouldn't be surprised within 5 years if the salary cap is 90 million or more. So that's when Draisaitl and McDavid's deal even start to look really good. And they still would have several years left before they're unrestricted free agents. So it's like you said, those deals should work. The only other thing that I think about, though, is with their prospects coming in, if you're envisioning Broberg or Bouchard as your top pairing guys down the road, do you have to sort of think about what you're paying other guys because these guys might be your big money makers one day, or is that just too far down the line to even think about?
It's a little ways down the line for sure, as far as Broberg and Bouchard go, and who knows where Clefbaum and Nurse are at that time. There is a fair amount of turnover still, even within core groups on NHL rosters. I think they're looking, whenever you sign a 6-7 year deal, I think the team's looking at the first 2 or 3 years, and then potentially after that you may move on from that player if you get into a money situation where you got to lock up your young guys. And like you said, there's a lot of money coming off the books. Obviously, Brandon Manning and Sam Gagner are 2 contracts that are going to free up a lot of space. The following summer is Adam Larson and Chris Russell, and perhaps they're even moved after this season with 1 year left on their deals. So
I thought Russell would get moved sooner.
Yeah, so the money, there's ways to make that happen, and there will be enough money to go around. And long term, they do have a nice or a decent opportunity here to set up the salary situation really well in Edmonton, because those contracts, as Sidney Crosby looks today, and McDavid's going to look like a bargain at some point, assuming, and I do assume the same as you, that the salary cap in the NHL is going to continue to trend as close to $100 million as possible within the next decade. And so, yeah, I think all things are looking up that way. And I think Ken Holland this summer was smart not to spend too much or lock up a guy like Gustav Nyquist, who maybe would have been a good fit. He's doing well in Columbus. Maybe he would have been a good fit with Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and Neil.
Connolly was another name.
Connolly was a guy that they were definitely in on. And, but again, to not give any term, to keep it to 1 year contracts, it really allows him to reevaluate next year, other than obviously Alex Chason has a year left. But there's a lot of holes in the lineup. And I think the idea is that keep those kids in Bakersfield and let's see them again next year at camp, whether Benson and Yamamoto. And I mean, who knows? Maybe Puljujarvi has a change of heart if there still isn't a trade market in June. Maybe he would consider coming back to Edmonton. I highly doubt it, but you got him sort of in the wings still. You got other guys, even like a Cooper Marody in that third line center role. Potentially, he's not having a great year in the American League, not as good as last season, but you got a guy like Ryan McLeod down there. And there's a lot of, high-end prospects coming. Raphael Lavoie, who we're going to see at the World Juniors, who I think, is not that far off from being an NHL player. Kirill Maximov, some of these young, cheap, entry-level wingers in the next couple of years is going to allow you to pay your top-end guys more as they come up for renewal. Again, I wouldn't overspend on a guy like Zach Kassian, but I think he fits a hole on the lineup right now for the next 3 to 4 years, and I don't see anybody necessarily on the right wing side coming up and bumping him out of that role. So I think it's an okay fit, and I think there's always risk signing a contract with anybody, and obviously if you play a physical role, there's the injury risk and stuff with Kassian and Nurse. But at those numbers, I'd extend them as soon as the opportunity presents itself for Ken Holland. But definitely negotiate. Don't throw around money because you'll need it someday. But definitely, if you can come up with a fair number, I have no bones about signing either of those two, Kassian or Nurse.
Absolutely. And, the Oilers are already so thin on the wings as it is. They can't really afford to lose someone, even though there are Oiler fans who will say that Kassian could be a potential overpay and they're really worried about that and hampering the team in the future. They have to keep the players that they have, especially the ones who are productive. And Kassian, a lot of people forget, was a former first-round pick. Like, he has skill, he has speed, he's one of the quicker players on the team, and he can protect the team's top players. So the fact that he's got those elements really makes him, I think, a valuable asset to this team. And I think that this is a great time to transition into some World Junior talk. Just to wrap up here, and once again, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me tonight. This is an exciting time of year for all Canadian hockey fans. I think everyone's glued to the TV around the Christmas season watching this tournament. And it's always a little more exciting when there's some Oiler prospects playing in it, because then you get that little added investment. Like, we're all watching Team Canada, but if you have a guy on Finland or Sweden or USA, then there's more of a reason to even watch those games. So with Raphael Lavoie making Team Canada and Philip Broberg back with Team Sweden, what do you expect from these two players in the tournament? And was there any surprise that these guys were going to be on the rosters?
Lavoie, I think, going into the season, being that he was just drafted, I know he's had some experience with Hockey Canada and he was really good at the summer showcase. But again, he had to take a step this season in the QMJHL to be a good candidate for the team come the selection camp. And obviously he's had a dynamite first half of the season in the QMJHL. His skating has improved, which is good news for the Oilers. That was something, the reason maybe he fell out of the first round and landed in their lap in the second round was some teams were a little iffy on his skating. It has improved. His shot volume is through the roof. He shoots the puck a ton. And I think Team Canada, when they got him to that selection camp, by that point they were pretty high on him, and he proved through that process and into the exhibition games that he belongs on. They still have one forward cut to make, but I would be very surprised if it was Raphael Lavoie. I think he's projected to play a top 9, potentially top 6 role, perhaps even with a bit of power play time, because he is such a shoot first guy, shoot first mentality, and he's got some high skill, and he's a bit of a bigger body too. So I think he's gonna potentially play a bigger role, even though he's technically 1 year younger than the group that would be the older guys on the team. So I like his chances of carving out a good role and making a name for himself in this tournament for Team Canada. And obviously with Broberg, I think watching what he did at the under-18 level, both at the Hlinka Gretzky Cup and at the World Under-18s for Sweden, which those two tournaments really cemented him as a top 10 pick, and the second or third best defenseman in the draft class. I think the fact he's represented his country so well last year at those two tournaments made him a favorite for this year's World Juniors, and the fact that he was very far into the process last year already. I know he was through their selection. I believe he made Sweden's World Junior team last year, but
he didn't play much.
Very limited role. He didn't have a big role, but this year I think he could have a starring role. Sweden produces as many good defensemen as any country.
Oh, yes.
And that Swedish blue line is pretty much all first-round picks. It's going to be stacked. But I do think just watching how dominant he was at the Hlinka Gretzky Cup and the World Under-18s in April, I think he's going to have a big role. And he's an impact player. He's a guy that you really notice. And, could he trend more like an Oscar Klefbom, kind of a two-way guy? In the future, he definitely could, but I think in a tournament like this, his skating and his offensive ability and his willingness to rush the puck is going to be on full display, and I think he'll have both those players are going to have pretty big impacts for their countries come the World Juniors, and that'll reflect positively again on the Oilers having one of these higher-end prospect pools coming.
Absolutely, and the other thing is like we said, this is his second time at the World Juniors, and he's still eligible to play in next year's tournament too. So with Broberg being the best defenseman at 2 under-18 tournaments already, obviously the one in Edmonton, we talked about the Gretzky Hlinka, and then 6-7 months later at the under-18s, that really bodes well for him. And I'm sure that Ken Holland was really high on this guy and his NHL future. So I'm not surprised that even when he was still working for the Red Wings, that this would have been a guy that he was looking at. So with the Oilers now getting him, they can kind of slow build him and that they don't have to rush him or anything. He could potentially come to Bakersfield next year, but I think the best thing to do is maybe leave him in Sweden for 2 years and then maybe bring him over because he's still so young. He was only 17 when he was drafted. And as for Lavoie, I believe he also had 5 goals in 5 games at the under-18s a couple of years ago because he joined the team late after his playoff series in the Quebec League ended. I know you follow the draft very closely, though, and you do mock drafts and all those sort of things. But if someone would have told you back in May or even June, right before the draft, that, hey, with the Oilers' top 2 picks, they're going to come away with Broberg and Lavoie, what would you have said?
I think the Broberg pick already was, whether it was Bob Stauffer or whoever else, there were a lot of signs pointing towards.
Yeah, they telegraphed it.
Yeah, if Broberg's there, Edmonton's going to take him. And I had Philip Broberg as, I believe, my 5th ranked prospect for much of the draft year. I had him certainly in the top 10 and closer to the top 5, right there with Bowen Byram. So I'm a big Philip Broberg fan, and I like that pick at the time, and I still like, do I see the value of a Cole Caulfield or some of these scoring wingers or even a kid like Peyton Krebs and stuff that went further down in the first round? I like a lot of those players too, but
so did I.
Yeah, I don't think you can go wrong with Philip Broberg. I like the pick. It was my prediction for Edmonton because it was telegraphed, but I had him ranked even higher than where he went. So, and as far as Raphael Lavoie goes, I had him as kind of a, between 15 and 25, somewhere in the middle of the first round. So to get him down at 39, I believe it was in the second round, you definitely you take that as a value pick. They probably didn't expect him to be on the board coming out of day 1, and probably even at the morning of day 2 with 6 or 7 or 8 picks ahead of them. I don't necessarily think they had Lavoie as a realistic guy at that spot. I think they were pleasantly surprised to get him there, and I think the fact he's been able to work on his skating with David Pelche and some of the skating coaches and stuff, I think as long as he can skate at the NHL level, he's going to score goals because he can shoot. He's got the instincts, the offensive instincts, and he's got the body positioning and the body size. I think he can be, I don't want to say he's going to be James Neal, but that type of player, right? I mean, he's sort of the successor to James Neal on the Oilers depth chart. Again, we didn't expect this much from James Neal. That was a pleasant surprise, but James Neal in his prime plays sort of the way Raphael Lavoie could potentially play. So I think, I think those two picks, if you would have told me prior to the draft that was going to happen, I would say that's almost a best case scenario. And I think that's happened a couple times with the Oilers in recent draft years where I've come away quite happy with their picks and matched up against my rankings and mock drafts. For the most part, guys fell to them, even a guy like Ryan McLeod. So I think all in all, that's why they have such a good prospect pool, is they've made a lot of value picks in the. They always got knocked for the longest time that outside of the first round was a lost cause. Well, the last, since the Caleb Jones, Ethan Bear draft in 2015, they've consistently had a few. I mean, again, everything's subjective until they're actually NHL players, but based on their development, it looks like they've had a lot better record outside of the first round as far as hitting on kids that are at least trending towards being NHLers and no longer getting too many quote unquote busts that are declared that a year or two after their draft year. Everybody is pretty much trending towards having a chance to play, and that's all you can ask of your scouts and your general manager for trusting his scouts.
Yeah, the draft record in the last 4 or 5 years has really been significantly improved, and we have to hope that the Oilers are going to continue to trend in this direction, because if you can keep bringing in young talent like that on cheap contracts, that's going to really set this team up well with their higher paid guys. So I'll ask you to put your scout hat on one more time and just kind of ask you about the two guys that we've been talking about. For Broberg and Lavoie, they are going to be playing at this tournament. We're going to get to see them a lot. Just, do you have an estimated time of arrival for when we'll see them in an Oilers sweater, and what kind of players you think the Oilers will be getting when they get there?
I think Broberg's probably 1.5 to 2 years away, like counting next season as the first year. I think I would highly consider bringing him over to Bakersfield and get him used to the smaller ice, because he's such an explosive skater and that's so much of his strength. The smaller ice is going to be an adjustment for him and taking chances and stuff. So I think I would, if he's willing to come to Bakersfield, as much as he's doing well there in the SHL, and again, he's only got I think 4 assists in 25 games, and there's room for growth in that league where he could, become more of a power play guy and stuff there next year. And Oscar Klefbom obviously stayed the extra year in Sweden, so that route wouldn't be bad by any means. But I would definitely entertain the idea of getting him over to Bakersfield next year and have him as a call-up option. Again, I think the left side of defense is a strength right now, because you have obviously Oscar Klefbom and Darnell Nurse are locked into those top 4 spots for the foreseeable future. Caleb Jones, if Chris Russell is moved, Caleb Jones is likely your third pairing left guy. And you got a guy like Dmitry Samorukov, who's having a pretty decent rookie season in Bakersfield, who I think has NHL upside. There would be no rush to get Philip Broberg into the NHL lineup, not the way they had to rush a guy like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins into a center role, or, some of the wingers they've brought along, they've had to accelerate. Jesse Puljujarvi. I think they can slow play Philip Broberg, whether that's in Sweden or Bakersfield, but I'd like to see him in Bakersfield, and I think he could debut potentially in the second half of next season. If he's back in Sweden, then obviously it'd be the following year where he would hopefully make the team out of camp. But if not, again, I don't think AHL seasoning would be a bad thing for him. I think he'll be an impact player, a top 4 defenseman whenever they determine he's ready. I think he'll be an immediate impact guy once they plug him into the lineup, but they will probably slow play him because that's Ken Holland's MO, the way he did business in Detroit. As far as Raphael Lavoie, there's more of an urgent need for scoring wingers. We all know that. There is Yamamoto and Benson, but they're not necessarily goal scorers. They're more playmakers, or kind of, they can do both. Whereas Lavoie, he's a shooter, much like Maximov. Those two, Lavoie and Maximov, I'd like to see them potentially. I mean, again, you can't rush their development, but I think they could fill roles potentially sooner than later. And Lavoie was a really late birthday for that draft year, so he is almost a year older than a lot of the draft class, which the Oilers have targeted some late birthdays. Evan Bouchard was another one. I think that helps them. They get to go to the AHL a year sooner. They don't have to do the 9 games or back to junior next year. Lavoie can play in the AHL, which is big. That's why the late birthday is attractive at the draft, and Bouchard as well was like that. So I think Maximov, he's going to need at least a full year in the AHL. I don't think he'll debut this year, but if he develops in the AHL and has a really good summer, he could challenge for a spot in training camp just based on the lack of depth and the lack of shooting, scoring wingers in Edmonton. And I think Raphael Lavoie, If he gets a really good World Junior experience, goes on a long playoff run, or has a good second half in the queue, I think he's a guy that could come to camp and potentially be in consideration for a roster spot next season. Again, Ken Holland's MO is likely to let him simmer in Bakersfield for at least the first half of next season, but I don't think he's as far away as some people might think, especially if his skating is at the NHL level.
Well, Larry, I just want to say once again, thanks so much for all your thoughts and opinions today and just having a good chat. I always enjoy talking to you on Twitter, so it was really great to kind of get some further insight on the team and the prospects coming up. Just for anyone who hasn't read your work yet or will be interested to, can you just give them an idea of where's the best place to find your stuff?
So my writing right now is primarily at thehockeywriters.com, and the easy way to find me or bookmark me is just to go thehockeywriters.com/author/L Fisher. And that'll take you right to my own personal work. And if you bookmark it, you can check up on me there. I try to do at least a handful of things per month. I do my monthly draft rankings with risers and fallers. At the start of the year, I was doing an Oilers Outsider column where I was kind of weighing in on every 10 games or every 5 games. But again, I'm a scout at heart, and it's hard to watch Oiler games when you're supposed to be watching junior hockey, and especially if you want to, get film from overseas and actually get eyeballs on these other kids. I don't watch the Oiler games as closely as I would like a lot of times, so I don't want to weigh in on stuff that I'm not an expert on. So I put most of my emphasis into the prospect writing, and the NHL draft stuff is where I spent a lot of my time. And so hopefully continuing on into the second half. Obviously, the Memorial Cup is here in Kelowna in May. I hope to be still in Kelowna and be able to cover that to some capacity, whether it be for a freelance outlet or for the Hockey Writers as well. And then the scouting stuff is kind of all internal. I file my game reports to future considerations, and they use my input towards their rankings and stuff, but I don't do a lot of necessary actual articles for FC Hockey. I do more so provide game reports and just my insight on players from the Western Conference in the WHL. And come the new year, I hope to see some more BC Hockey League action as well, the Junior A League in BC. So that's sort of what I'm up to and where you can find me, mainly at the Hockey Writers these days.
That's awesome. Well, Larry, once again, it's been great having you, and hopefully you'll be back on the show again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Eric, and keep up the good work on the show and all the rest.
Definitely. So for Larry Fisher, I'm Eric Friesen. This has been the 99 Forever podcast. We're out.